Williams' Manifesto. Free thoughts on the state of children's rights in the 21st century. Introduction. For the entirety of human existence, youth have played an important role in the development of our species. From the earliest days of humanity, they have helped in hunting, cleaning, and other such manual tasks. Once the years of towns and castles arrived, the youth could be found tending to animals, sowing farm crops, and sweeping the floors. In some cases, teenagers were given a sword and shield and marched off to war. A step out of line could be met with a swift hit by the ladle or belt. In the time of the Industrial Revolution, children as young as 8.5 years old would go to work in dangerous conditions, harming both short-term and long-term health. In Europe's wars, all sides conscripted those as young as 14 into the armed forces, even while not treating them as human beings. As the 20th century turned to the 21st, many of these overtly discriminatory behaviors and practices toward the youth were abolished. The new form of conflict allows us to express limited opinions, something a select few have opted to do. The new conflict is as follows. On one side is the egalitarian, the childist, who believes in the freedom of all of humanity. The childist will in most cases keep their opinion to themselves, for fear of punishment. There are a select few who will fight, with words or war, for equal rights no matter the cost. This category is mostly made up of the youth. On the other side is the oppressor, the adultist, who believes wrongly in adult superiority, that adults should have complete control over the young. This category is made of mostly adults and select youth scared into this system. In the middle is a class of teenagers whose minds are not completely made up. This class must make up their minds one way or another, and generally if their minds are not made up by the time they are 21 they become adultists themselves. This is not a manifesto on politics, economics, or any of the other topics used to polarize and distract the people. This is a manifesto on the never-ending fight for human rights. The ideal society, where all are equal, and minors and adults live on an equal footing, is constantly hindered by the great length the adult will go to convince you that you are happy within the current system, or at least that there is no choice but the current system. The child is indoctrinated at a very young age, and therefore grows up believing the lie. If one believes something with all of their heart, they will pass the lie to their children, and become the oppressor. The adultist has a further incentive for maintaining the status quo, as the main pillar of adultism teenagers and the young are not intelligent enough to be given any voice. Therefore any compromise destroys the entire principle of adultism, and is a major defeat. As hard as the childist pushes for equality, the adultist will always match that strength with their own. Children and teenagers are biologically less developed than adults, making them naturally dependent. But being dependent does not equate to being subordinate. Just as one should not treat a disabled adult who depends on an adult's care with less respect, one should not consider teenagers as less deserving of respect. Having a responsibility to care for the young does not equate to ownership over them. Teenagers are people in their own right, with their own minds and bodies, deserving of equality and respect. The adultist will say that since the young do not contribute as much to society, they shouldn't be treated as an equal. But rights are not something to be earned. Assuming less responsibility and being limited in contribution does not mean you deserve restricted rights. Rights are not dependent on size, ability, mental capacity, experience, age, or anything else. All people deserve bodily autonomy, freedom of expression, and to not be harmed, physically or mentally. All people deserve respect, the right to have their opinion heard, and a say in the decisions that affect them. No one deserves to be shamed, coerced, or otherwise manipulated into doing things to meet others' needs. Everyone deserves to be treated respectfully and equally. No one is the property of another person. So why don't people recognize adultism? Why don't people believe that it is an issue? Why will people read this and roll their eyes while they exclaim, "They're just children. Children are happy and healthy. This is just the way it's always been and this is okay." Maybe because they spent or are spending childhood feeling the same. Inferior. Powerless. And once they have reached the superior social status of adult, they feel it is their right to be able to finally wield this power. Compromise, understanding, equality, and respect for teenagers feels like a defeat, as discussed earlier, or relinquishing a title they have or are waiting for. But power shouldn't come at the expense of others. And a self-worth based on the oppression of others is a very fragile self-worth indeed. Instead, we can aim for a much more positive type of power. The power to instigate change. The power to speak out. The power to stand up for what is right. The power to choose to exist without sacrificing our rights as humans in the process. Children's oppression is the most basic form of oppression, underlying all other forms of violence, as adultism teaches the young about toxic power dynamics in a way that makes them seem natural, or even necessary. When one is a child, they look to a higher age as a prize, and once one gets there, they use the power they so desperately craved as a child. The cycle continues. Society expects caretakers or parents of a child to control the child, in ways such as expressing opinions or emotions. But you cannot control the emotions or opinions of a child, as much as you couldn't control an adult's views or feelings. The system says that children should be seen and not heard, and the main parenting techniques include the phrase, "do as I say, not as I do," one way or another. If you have read this far, it is likely that you can accept the following as truth. Teenagers and the young are not afforded the same rights as adults. Teenagers and the young deserve equal rights as adults. Teenagers and the young must fight for these rights with either words or war. Adultism in schools. The foundation of the modern school system is a shaky one at best. It was created subversively to produce obedient and subservient youth, and it executes this task to near perfection. It does this in many ways, ranging from small comments or hints at the inferiority of children to outright commands. The teenager is not allowed to explore their own interests, not allowed to choose what to learn, when to learn it and at what pace to learn it. They are now in the school system where they tell you what to learn, when to learn it, and how to learn it. The student's way of acquiring information has now changed. They are no longer the master of their own destiny, no longer the craftsman that is going to create a majestic work of art. The student is now led by a group of people who say that they know best, that they are the student's natural superiors by virtue of age. The student is led by a group of people who think that they have all the answers and that their way is how it is supposed to be done. And so, the student forgets their curiosity, they forget that they were born with a uniqueness for learning and a passion to learn certain things. They forget what a delight and how amazing learning can be. They have become institutionalized. They follow. They obey. Adultism is pervasive in the modern school system. It's well known to everyone who's been there. Students must ask to use the bathroom, raise their hand to talk, and wait for a bell to leave. Most people don't need a list or data to prove whether students are oppressed in school because they know from life experience that they are. The sad reality is rather obvious, however, the fact that students universally being silenced in school isn't seen as a serious problem. Adults can be arrogant, they are convinced that they have to teach children authoritatively, believing that students are not intelligent enough to be given any freedoms. Every single teacher, cafeteria worker, school psychologist, education administrator, after-school worker, summer school teacher, playground monitor, speech and language therapist, math tutor, and school principal discriminates against students. Who invented schools? Adults. Who decided all children and youth need to go to schools? Adults. Who teaches, leads, counsels, facilitates, administrates, and otherwise runs schools? Adults. I define adultism as bias towards adults that can result in discrimination against children and youth. Since adults are the drivers, maintainers, leaders, and sustainers of schools, schools are inherently and implicitly biased towards adults. Everything from cafeteria tables to laws making education compulsory to the voter-denied school funding levy passively and actively reflects adultism. Seeking to make students into their visions, adultists reshaped childhood to ensure that the youth were comprehensible and controllable. Because of that, the status of students has become passive, static, and predictable. Students in schools are subjected to their parents' and their teachers' assessments of their performance in the classroom, and have no formal input into grading or class rules. Searching for adult approval in order to receive the most praise or achieve the best grades, students routinely appease adults with sufficient class work without actually engaging in the content being taught. They find solidarity with the adultist who controls their classrooms while betraying the trust of their fellow childist as they inform and compare each other to themselves. School takes advantage of students' helplessness to manipulate their lives. Younger students dislike school but can't say why exactly. Their reasons, boring lessons, mean teachers, homework, early waking, don't seem serious enough for adults. Students have the feeling of pointlessness. Many believe silently that they're being treated unfairly, as they are. School gets harder and even more controlling at a point of life when students need to be valued and respected. But students' opinions of school are overlooked because they are immature, which makes them have unrealistic desires, such as free speech, or choosing what to wear in school without being dress-coded. How hypocritical of the school system to say that teenagers need support and understanding and then label them as inadequate when students show resistance. They must be thinking they're trying to help students to cope with problems, but instead they evade responsibility and devalue the very seriousness of adolescent unmet needs and emotional problems. Apparently, although teenagers are humans, they aren't deserving of the same respect as one. It's the same with much well-meaning educational adultism that is intended to keep young people or others safe. If a building is burning down, the adult's responsibility is to grab everyone and make sure they are out of the building, regardless of age. However, in our schools, adults constantly act as if the building is burning down. That's what must change. Adultism in homes. The home can be defined as a space where at least one human is in residence, usually a family. The familial structure can be based loosely upon age, with the masters being ultimately the parent/guardian. The higher up in years, the higher up in freedom. When one progresses to the ages of 12 and up, they generally start verbally demanding the same freedoms as an adult. These are not given, and instead the adult will turn to methods of punishment in a desperate cling to power. As the child grows into a teenager, they also grow in the ability to defend themselves and fight back. Thus the cycle continues, with the adult resorting to even harsher crackdowns. The cycle only ends when the teenager becomes an adult themselves, and forgets the battle. This section of the manifesto is dedicated to the parental aspect of adultism. A common tactic used to inflict the will of the parent is yelling. This is still used in the 21st century, but only now have we begun to understand the long-term effects. Yelling has been observed to increase anxiety, low self-esteem, and aggression. It also decreases resistance to bullying, as understanding of boundaries and perceptions of self-respect have been skewed. The psychological effects make yelling potentially as dangerous as physical abuse. Many parents do not know this fact, or worse still, embrace this form of punishment simply to enforce obedience. Another such method is taking away objects of value to the teenager, electronics most often in the 21st century. The phone, the main tool of the 21st century teenager. An all too easy target to cripple resistance to parental control, by simply threatening to take it. When this happens, the parent threatens to take away one of the only modes of communication the teenager has. When the parent removes communication, the parent-teenager relationship breaks down. When the parent punishes the teenager by taking the phone, they are more than likely to not directly address the real problem. It is much easier to simply take a phone than deal with an uncomfortable situation. The phone is the newest ransom option in the fight against teenage autonomy. The previous are ways that the parent keeps the child restrained, but to keep true authoritarian power one must credit themselves as the main unquestionable source of information. Therefore, the parent establishes themselves as the only truth from a young age, with such phrases as, "because I said so." This can make children poor communicators later in life, cause anxiety, and fray the parent-child relationship. Never mind that it establishes the parent as the superior that gives orders, and not as an equal who teaches. Childism starts as merely an interesting thought, but over time it seeps into your perception of the world until it's saturated and you realize that yes, this is a huge deal and yes, it's completely endemic in society. How did we as the United Youth not realize that our whole segment of society is being marginalized and mistreated? Teenagers and the youth make up 27% of the world's population. It's even stranger when you think that all the adultists were children once themselves. Surely they should all be able to remember and empathize? I can only conclude, after 14 years of hard thought, that we are ignorant because ours is the one section of society that has not fought its own battles. Parents patronize the youth. They talk down to us. They talk over us. They call us names. They laugh about our failures. They hold us to higher standards of self-regulation than they do themselves. They apply behavior modification techniques such as punishment and rewards. They value quiet obedience and conformity above individuality and freedom. They tolerate the punishment and oppression of human beings, then pat themselves on the back for being good disciplinarians. Even the phrase, "my child," has been corrupted. One's son is one's child only in the way that one's brother is one's brother. The child is not the adults in the sense of ownership, only relationally. But if they don't respect this nuance, it opens the way for, "oh, he's my child and I'll do what I like with him." Adultism and parental control, completely opposed to democracy, cause side effects too big to ignore. To truly root out this injustice, we must start in the home. It is at home that children learn best how to dominate and marginalize the less powerful. We cannot simply stand on the sidelines and wait for our freedom. Resisting adultism. The current system may be an adultist's dream and a childist's nightmare, but there are degrees of resistance to gain an upper hand. These can be classified into 3 categories: subtle, nonviolent, and violent. Subtle is what the quiet egalitarian would use, not being even perceived as resistance by the untrained eye. Nonviolent is for the childist, the one not afraid to peacefully fight for their human rights. Violent resistance should only be used in the most extreme of situations, where it is absolutely necessary, and it must be organized or it will easily fall apart. Subtle resistance can be used anywhere, from schools to homes, as it is almost impossible to detect and crack down on. One method of subtle resistance is joining a local childist organization, going to their meetings and truly listening. An excuse most often believed by parents is simply that it is a meeting with friends. Another is simply shaping the family dynamic into more of a democracy, and remaining calm even when yelled at. This will make your opinion heard more, and allow you to extract better deals from tense situations. This may be a difficult process, and it takes from a few months to a year, but the silence of opinions for a while will be worth it. The phone, the main tool of the 21st century teenager, is simultaneously a link to friends and family, to entertainment on an unprecedented level, and a way to see activities that may be occurring anywhere in the world. Although it leaves a teenager vulnerable to consolidate valuable assets together as such, it is too late now to separate. Chances are, your parents/guardians are monitoring and restricting your phone, covertly or not. This is unpreventable, but can be minimized by not using the phone as much. The second method is nonviolent resistance, which entails protest, both in school and in home. Subtle resistance should be completed first, to elevate your opinion and voice's value in your familial structure. If you already have a link to an organized childist movement and a democratic household, you can skip to nonviolent resistance. Without using your phone, perhaps through school or coded letters, reach out to those who say they also are willing to engage in nonviolent resistance. Create or join an organization more centered on fighting for rights to publicize the movement. Organizing protests is a good way to gain support and put pressure on the school and parental authorities to change the balance of power. Make a specific reason for each protest, don't fight for everything at once. A protest should only be attempted if you have more than 30 students participating. Getting a teacher to join will significantly legitimize the movement, although it is very unlikely that an adult would sacrifice a dominant position in society for equal rights. Flags, banners, signs, and other large written symbols will rally more students behind your cause, as they associate your symbol with the fight for freedom. Make sure that the protests never go violent, and if the authorities threaten violence, the community must know. After a series of smaller protests, make a large, all-out protest, where everyone who supports the cause marches. This should force the adultists into agreeing with the proposed reforms. If they do not, do it again. Other schools and even districts may join in protest. If authorities do not cave in, and instead crack down hard on the movement, there is one final option. Violent resistance should not be attempted except for the most dire of situations. If authorities respond to the marches with outright violence, like beatings and physical restraint of protesters, then escalation is necessary. If possible, the fight should happen across many districts or even states, all breaking out within a week. Seize weapons like batons, but do not use them unless absolutely no other option is possible. Make, buy, or take if necessary, riot gear or protective armor. A long, protracted fight is infeasible, and any violent resistance must happen within the span of 2 weeks at most. In this crucial time, put pressure on local governments to increase the rights of children. But remember, if the revolution fails, you will be punished for it, even if you did not support it. By virtue of being a teenager or student, you will be punished. So if a revolution erupts, whether peaceful or violent, join in. Liberate yourself and your fellow students from adultism. For students. For freedom. William Gray.